Thank you, David and Rylan, all those that participated in worship to this point. Appreciate Bill's prayer so very much. Good to see everybody today. We're glad you're here. I hope you noticed that our sticks are changing. I don't know if have you been paying attention to the sticks? They're not the same. Every week they seem to be a little different than they were. So I just find that interesting for sticks to change. But then I've been walking on the streets a lot lately, and the sticks out in the woods are changing too, aren't they? There's starting to be a few thicker buds and blooms. It sure seems like a late spring to me, but that seems maybe my life. I don't know. Last week I changed my time. I wasn't sleeping at all 2 weeks ago. So last Friday night I changed time. So this week is great. I'm ready to go this morning. I've already been changed time for a week. Marlene thought I was crazy. So I started eating breakfast at 5, lunch at 11, supper at 4, went to bed at 8. And so now I can go back to my regular schedule. So if you don't have a regular schedule, I highly recommend you find one. They really do help your life. I started sleeping again, and your life is much, much better when you are rested than when you are not. As is witnessed this morning, many of you missed your sleep last night. May you find a nap this afternoon, as Doug said. Choosing a path. You start to choose a path and you wonder where it's going to take you. You get to the end of the sidewalk and you can turn left or you can turn right. And you look down the street and you see a few indicators, and then you look the other way and you see a few other indicators. Maybe there's a flashing neon sign, or maybe there's an Eat at Joe's sign, and it probably depends on whether you're hungry or what's attracting your attention. But the direction you take is going to change your life. It's going to modify where you're at. And choosing the right path really begins to modify our fears. When we think about what Peter says here in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 13, who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? That's a favorite passage of mine out of the New American. It says, I think, right in a couple of other versions, but who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? Choosing a path. You sit down with your remote for your television, and you're fixing to choose a path. I don't know how you make decisions. There aren't many things I get to watch because of choices that we make, right? You start to look. I nearly quit NCIS. I mean, I've been watching NCIS forever, but on Paramount Plus, on NCIS, it now says TV Mature. Well, I don't watch TV Mature. If it says TVMA on any apparatus, I don't watch it. I don't care what it is. My sister sends me this great program. I won't mention it. Some of you probably watch it. I said, sorry, I just can't watch it. Well, I've never seen any of it. Well, why not? Because at the very beginning it says TV-MA. I'm not going to watch anything where someone in the media is saying this is for a mature audience. I'm not old enough for that. I can't handle it. You sit there with your remote and you choose a direction. Where are you going to go? I remember Pale Rider was the first R-rated movie I ever saw. So it was old and I was old, but how do we make decisions? How do we make determinations? What's healthy and what's not healthy? And how do we get to where we need to be? And he says there is a time in your life where you're going to have to make some of those hard decisions. And for the church that he's writing to, they have decided that they're going to be Christians in the midst of a pagan world. And it's one of the temptations when you do that is to make your own community. We're going to isolate ourselves from everyone else. We'll have a little monastery, or we'll separate ourselves. It'll be a lot easier, a lot less stressful if we just get together and live together and we don't have all the stressors of the larger world. And that's not what God called us to do. God called us to live in the midst of our world with that information. Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? Now notice what he says. He doesn't say if you choose against the bad. He says, I want you to prove zealous for what is good. I want you to be impassioned by what is the very best, so that when you have opportunity to do two good things, you choose the very best thing. And you're excelling. That's the love that God calls us to. He says, I want you to choose the very best thing. I want you to be zealous for what is good. And he uses the word zealous, which is a strange word in the New Testament. We have, Simon the Zealot, that's one of the followers of Jesus. And we have someone who is really sold out. He says, I want you to understand there's no one to harm you if you sell out for what is good. Make that your determination. I'm going to do what is good. I'm not going to settle for a mate. I'm not going to settle. No, I'm going to pursue that which is excellent. I'm going to be zealous. And if I don't find an excellent mate, I'm going to live with Christ all my life. That's going to be my role. I'm going to find an excellent one. And if I find that my mate is not excellent, or if I find that maybe I'm not an excellent mate, I'm going to change my thinking to choose the excellent and become the excellent mate. I'm going to be zealous for what is good. But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you're blessed. You're blessed. Well, I'm suffering for the sake of righteousness. I decided to choose good. I heard of a young man this week who every time he tries to do good in his life, it seems like he just gets knocked down. He thinks that he could make it much easier if he just accepted the world the way it is. But here's what the passage says. He says, even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you're blessed. That's the key. Where he comes along, he says, Jesus never said his road was going to be easy to follow him. He suffers for the sake of righteousness, and he is blessed. And I need to take that role where I accept the fact that there's no one that can harm me if I choose to be zealous for good. And even if I should suffer, I'm blessed, because there's something inherently healthy about choosing to do the good thing. Choosing to do the right thing. There is a character, an integrity, a truth that is maintained when we choose to be zealous for the good. We'll find ourselves blessed. Do not fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled. Bring it on. The world is going to be intimidated by you, and they're going to do all they can to intimidate you. And as they are bringing their opposition to you and oppressing you and saying, look, wouldn't it be easier just to go along to get along? Why do you Christians have to stand for all this right, truth, justice, God thing? Why can't you just get along in our world? And that's a temptation, isn't it? The temptation is when I find myself on trial. It's that Sophie's Choice dimension where I find myself in a concentration camp, and pretty soon my thinking is I can align myself. My life will actually be easier, and the life of my children will be easier if I align myself with my oppressors. If I give in to what they want. If I start to act and think like they act and think. He says, no, you've not chosen the good any longer. You've chosen the compromise. And every time you choose to compromise, you pick away and you chip away and you find yourself harmed. But there's no one to harm you if you're zealous for what is good. Who'll bring a charge against God's elect? The Romans 8 passage. No one's going to bring a charge against God's elect. God's the one who justifies. You can't bring a charge against God's elect. So don't fear them and don't fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled. As you choose your path, choose to do the good. The best thing you can do as you make that choice is to sanctify Christ as Lord in your heart. We don't do too well with sacred spaces. We're going to do a little sprucing up in the auditorium this week. Ray and Chase have some plans. They're working on some things. we don't do too well with our sacred spaces. We need to think about how we craft a place. Where do you go to pray? Well, I can pray anywhere all the time. I pray everywhere. Usually, if you pray everywhere, you likely don't pray anywhere. You need somewhere to pray. You need a place that you have dedicated. It can be a chair in your house. It can be a chair on the back porch. It can be just a stroll around the same oak tree at the same time every day, where you spend that time with God in communication. But that becomes sacred space to you. It becomes sacred space. In the winter, mine is early in the morning while it's still dark, sitting beside the wood stove in a 100-year-old rocker that was my mom's. And that begins to be sacred space. And if I skip too many mornings without sitting in that chair, I start to lose myself. I start to be distracted, and I start to have just conflict. But if I spend 15 or 20 minutes in that chair every morning, usually in the dark, usually just thinking about you, Scripture, God, sick, praying, it changes things. Now, in the summer, it moves to my rocker on the back porch. When it's warm enough that you can go sit outside without your jacket on in the morning. We're nearly there. I'm going to get a morning or two this week. That's where I go. But pick your place, find your slot, and make sure that you don't lose that sacred space. Now, that's just an ad for prayer, I suppose. That's not really what this is talking about. He says here, I want you to sanctify Christ as Lord in your heart. I want your heart to become the sacred space where you long for Jesus to live. You beg Jesus to move in. Where you have made a holy place in your life for Jesus to be elevated, for Him to be Lord. And the holy place in your life is your heart. And when He has control of your heart, He has control of everything in your life, your thoughts and your actions and your attitudes and your emotions, everything. Jesus gets to be Lord of everything. He says the very first step to choosing to be zealous for good is to sanctify Christ as Lord in your heart. It simplifies your life. There's someone in charge of my life today, and it's not me. Someone in charge of my world today, and it's not me. I don't have to watch the news and figure out what I think about everything that's happening. I believe in a God who is in control of our world, who orchestrates actions and activities, who guides my life and will dictate my actions. He'll tell me how to treat Marlene today. Well, that's pretty practical. And I know He does, because if I mistreat her, I know it, don't I? Immediately, I've not chosen the good. He'll say, no, if you walk with me, if you consecrate me as Lord in your heart, that's my great desire for you. So now we've chosen the path we're going to take, and we've set apart a place. Our heart is where Jesus sits on the throne. We consecrate Him as Lord in our hearts. What can I do now that I can't do without it? Well, now I can make a defense to everyone who asked me about my hope. Why do you have so much hope? What are you so hopeful of? Don't you see the world is going to hell, and that we have a stressed out environment and nothing is right about anything? No, I don't see it that way. I have a hope. The hope. And I can defend that hope. By the way, look at our sign here at the front. We'll move that to the sides this week. The hope is our theme for this year. And you can have a defense of the hope. I chose to follow God and choose the good. I let Jesus be Lord in my life, and now I can defend. This is actually the word for make the apologetics. Always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account of the hope that is in you. That's our challenge. He doesn't say, go hide yourself away on a mountain. He doesn't say, ignore the rules of God and live by the rules of the world. He says, when someone asks you why you have this hope, you verbalize your response. You tell them why the gospel means so much to you. Sanctify Christ as Lord in my heart, always being ready. I'm ready. I'm just going to make a defense. Can you defend what you believe in the midst of a world filled with evolution and the worship of humanity and the worship of all that we know instead of the worship of God himself? He says, I can make a defense. I have this hope. Jesus died for me. It's the hope that David spoke of. All the things that were listed there that he spoke of that make the table come to life. I have a hope that someone gave themselves as a sacrifice for me. Their perfection answered my imperfection, and their goodness took care of my sin. And therefore, I pursue their good and let them be in control of my life. To everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope, I'm going to heaven. I'm going to spend timelessness in the realm of God. I'm going to walk and talk with Jesus. Well, that's a lot of hope. That's the hope that we have. This world is not my home. And I'm persuaded that better things are on the horizon. And I'm not going to wait anymore for those. I'm going to claim those now, even if it brings suffering in the midst of the world that I have. I have this hope that is in me. Right? It's that hope that you have. It's something that no one can take away from you. And when you have that hope, everything in your life changes. The way you suffer, the way you hear cancer, the way that you hear hospice, all those things change when the hope that is in you is that genuine hope. And we have the best guide of all. We have someone to show us how to do this. He says, do this with gentleness and reverence. He doesn't say stand on the street corners with a bullhorn and yell at everybody as they drive by. He doesn't say that when someone is sarcastic to you, you be better sarcastic to them. He says, no, when someone asks you to give an account of the hope that you have, you do that with gentleness and reverence. Not because you revere them, but because you revere God. You respect that God created them, but you revere God. And we do this with gentleness. There was meekness on the cross, but there was no weakness on the cross. There was none of this that comes to the cross and says, this is meaningless. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to die. No, there was a meekness that chose to die, a submission that chose to give his life for you and for me. And so he does that with gentleness and with reverence. Into your hands I commit my spirit, he tells the Father. And he does that with gentleness and reverence. And he reminds us now, as we live in the midst of an ungodly world, keep a good conscience, so that in the thing in which you are slandered, they slandered Jesus, said all sorts of things about him. The things in which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ will be put to shame. What did the centurion say at the foot of the cross? Truly, this was the Son of God. They had nailed him and beaten him and had that flogging, and he had borne up under all of that. And people who slandered him and said, behold, the King of the Jews. No, he's put up there, he says he's the king. No, the King of the Jews, we write it above his head, and it's a slanderous word for them. But Jesus puts them to shame. How do they feel? He says, no, he doesn't put them to shame by ridiculing them or by usurping them, but by meekly, gently dying for them. It is better if God should will it so that you suffer for doing what is right rather than for doing what is wrong. Those sweat drops of blood came to Jesus because he chose to suffer for doing what is right. He came in the name of God. He chose the good way, and he died for us. Verse 18 at the bottom. For Christ also died for sins, once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. That's the power of following the good course, choosing the path of God's relationship with you. He leaves you that choice. And we're really going to talk about verse 18 next week. There's a powerful point to be made, and we go from there into baptism now saves you. We'll tie all that together. Having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, will make our key thought for next week. But this week, your take-home is very simple. Have you given Jesus the sacred space of your heart? Do you let him visit, or does he live there? And is he Lord in your life? In charge of you, in charge of what you do, in charge of what you watch and what you listen to and where you go and how you talk? Is he in charge of those things? Are you choosing the excellent way, zealous for doing good? If you suffer, it's okay. Jesus suffered. He suffered for us. He died for us. The ultimate suffering, suffered to the point of death, even death on the cross, so that we might be made alive together with him. The journey is well worth the cost. Whatever you think you've lost as a Christian, it's well worth the cost when you have gained an eternal reward. And so this morning, if you don't have your reward, if it's not yours, if you don't have that peace, the peace of God that surpasses all comprehension, if you don't have that relationship that says, I am on the Lord's side, then I hope you're being persuaded now to take that step. If you need more information, we're here to study with you. If you have the information you need, it's time to take that step and to make that choice. When you get to the end of the pew, you can come this way or you can go that way. If you've never chosen God, what an amazing opportunity to do that right now as together we stand and sing.